Nobody in that hospital room expected Evelyn Parker's final wish to destroy 3 lives before it brought them together. Not the lawyers, not the doctors, not the relatives already calculating their inheritance, and certainly not the young woman who had spent 4 years quietly serving the family without ever imagining she would become the center of a storm that had been building for 27 years. The rain lashed the windows of Mary's Medical Center in Asheville, North Carolina. Lightning split the sky. Inside the private suite on the top floor, 58-year-old Evelyn Parker lay motionless beneath white sheets. The oxygen tubes, the monitors, the fading color in her face, they all told the same story. Time was running out, yet her blue eyes remained sharp, focused, determined, as if she still had one final battle left to fight. At the foot of the bed stood her only child, Michael Parker, 32, tall, well-dressed, successful, everything a mother could be proud of. He squeezed her hand gently. "Mom, you don't have to do this tonight." Evelyn managed a faint smile. "Yes, I do." For weeks, she had insisted that everyone gather. Family members, attorneys, executives, even household staff. No one understood why. The doctors warned her to conserve her energy. She refused. She kept saying the same thing over and over. "There's something I need to settle before I go." Now everyone had assembled, and nobody knew what was coming. Across the room stood Grace Collins, 27, long blonde hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders. Simple navy dress. She kept her hands folded and avoided eye contact. She never felt comfortable around wealth. She had come to work for Evelyn after her own mother died. At first it was just a job. Over time it became something more. Evelyn had treated her with genuine kindness, almost like family. But Grace never fully understood why. Tonight, standing near the window watching the storm outside, a strange knot formed in her stomach. Something wasn't right. Something had been wrong for weeks, and it was about to get much worse. Evelyn slowly looked around the room. Every face, every expression. Then she nodded toward her attorney. Richard Bennett stepped forward carrying a leather folder. "The witnesses are present," he said softly. Evelyn took a shallow breath. Good. Silence filled the room. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Then Evelyn looked directly at Michael. "I need you to promise me something." Michael frowned. "Anything?" "No." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't answer until you hear it." A nervous laugh spread through the room. Then Evelyn glanced toward the window, toward Grace. Several heads turned. Grace immediately looked away. Then Evelyn looked back at her son and spoke clearly, with every ounce of strength she had left. "My final wish is that you marry Grace." The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For several seconds, the only sound was the steady beeping of hospital equipment and the rain beating against the glass. Michael stared at his mother. "What?" "You heard me. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now so you never miss a story like this one." Relatives exchanged horrified looks. One woman pressed her hand to her mouth. Grace went pale. "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. Every eye in the room swung toward her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Michael was already on his feet. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Evelyn remained perfectly calm. "Marry her. This isn't funny. I'm not joking." The seriousness in her voice silenced the entire room. "Why?" Michael demanded. "Why would you ask me this?" Evelyn looked past him, toward the rain-covered window and some memory only she could see. Then she said the 8 words that made everything heavier. "Because it's the only way to keep my promise." A promise? To whom? Nobody had any answer. Evelyn simply turned and looked at Grace. Directly. And what Grace saw in those eyes was not a confused, dying woman. It was someone carrying a guilt so old it had become part of her bones. "Grace." Barely a whisper. Evelyn reached toward her with one trembling hand. Grace hesitated, then crossed the room and took it. The moment their hands connected, tears spilled from Evelyn's eyes. You deserve to know everything. The room leaned in, but before Evelyn could say another word, her body seized. A violent coughing fit. The machine spiked. Doctors rushed forward. For several desperate minutes, the room was chaos and fear and screaming monitors. She stabilized. Barely. A physician pulled Michael aside. You should prepare yourself. As the room settled, Evelyn motioned weakly to Richard Bennett. He straightened and looked at Michael. Your mother has instructed me to deliver sealed letters after her passing. One for you, one for Grace, and one that must remain sealed until a specific condition is met. What condition? I'm not permitted to say. Grace stood holding Evelyn's hand and felt the ground shift beneath her. What promise? What letters? And why did it suddenly feel as though her entire life had been built on something she was never shown? Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Evelyn opened her eyes one final time. She looked at Michael, then Grace, then back to Michael, and with the last of her voice, she whispered 4 words. Trust me this once. Michael stood frozen, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he could. Neither of them knew that sealed inside those letters was a secret buried for 27 years, powerful enough to unmake everything they believed about themselves and their families. And before that truth could surface, someone would do everything possible to make sure it stayed buried forever. Evelyn Parker was gone by midnight. Richard found Grace in the small hospital chapel 2 floors up. She already knew before he said a word. When? She whispered. About 10 minutes ago. He sat beside her. Then he produced an envelope from his briefcase. Her name written across the front in Evelyn's handwriting. Grace broke the seal. Grace, if you are reading this, then I am already gone. There are things about your life that you do not know. Things I should have told you years ago. Please do not leave Asheville, no matter what anyone says. Stay. The truth is finally coming. And when it arrives, do not blame Michael. He knows nothing. Not yet. I am more sorry than you can ever imagine. Evelyn. Grace read it 3 times. Things about your life that you do not know. What things? And why was this woman, who owed Grace nothing, apologizing as though she had wronged her? The will reading the next morning turned the Parker estate into a battlefield. Relatives arrived from every direction. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Everyone wanted answers, and everyone wanted money. Richard Bennett stood at the fireplace at noon and began reading. Charitable donations. Staff bonuses. Nothing unexpected. Then he reached the final pages. The remainder of the Parker estate shall pass to my son, Michael Parker. The room exhaled. Exactly what everyone expected. Then Richard continued. Subject to one condition. Michael Parker must marry Grace Collins. The explosion was immediate. Voices from every direction. She manipulated her. No maid deserves that fortune. This is blackmail. Victoria Sterling, Michael's girlfriend of nearly 3 years, went white, then red. Then the specific fury of a woman watching everything she planned fall apart. People turned to stare at Grace. Not with curiosity, with accusation. One woman said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Funny how the maid ends up at the center of the fortune. Victoria turned toward Grace directly. Would you like to explain how you convinced a dying woman to make you the most important person in her will? I didn't do anything. Enough. Michael's voice cut across the room. The noise stopped. Something about watching Grace stand there, alone and pale and genuinely afraid, bothered him in a way he couldn't yet name. His mother had never been a woman anyone could manipulate. If Evelyn made this choice, there was a reason. Richard waited for silence. Then, if Michael formally refuses, the estate passes to an alternate beneficiary whose identity will only be revealed at the moment of refusal. The trap closed, quiet and total. Across the room, Aunt Diane sat very still with a small, calculated smile. If Michael refused, that inheritance had to go somewhere. She had spent years positioning herself to be the most logical somewhere. She was wrong about almost everything. That evening, Michael found Grace in the servant quarters with a half-packed suitcase on the bed. "I heard you're leaving. I think it's better." He leaned against the doorframe. Not angry, just exhausted. Carrying too many questions and no place to put them. "My mother's letter said not to let you leave Asheville." Grace looked up. Mine said the same thing. They stared at each other. Two strangers bound together by a dead woman's instructions and a secret neither understood. Grace slowly lifted the clothes back out of the suitcase. The next morning, alone in his mother's office, Michael found a brass key in the center drawer. A handwritten tag attached. For Michael only. Behind the bookshelf, a locked cabinet he had never noticed. He inserted the key. Inside, one wooden box. Inside the box, an old photograph and a sealed envelope. The photograph showed Evelyn, 30 years younger, standing beside a woman Michael had never seen. Blonde, light skin, a smile that sent a jolt through his chest because he had seen it before. On Grace's face, every time she thought no one was watching. On the back, in Evelyn's handwriting, "For saving us all." He opened the envelope. 5 words written across the front. "Open when Grace stays." He broke the seal anyway. "Michael, there are things about September 14th, 1998 that you were never told. I lied to you. I lied to everyone. The truth begins with a debt that cannot be repaid. It begins with a woman named Beatrice Collins. 27 years ago, Beatrice saved your life." He stopped reading. He sat down and read the sentence again. Beatrice Collins, Grace's mother, saved his life. He had never even met this woman. He kept reading, but the next paragraph was gone. Torn away. A ragged edge where the explanation should have been. Only the final lines remained. "When the truth comes out, people will lose everything. Be careful who you trust, especially those closest to you." A noise broke the silence. Downstairs. A door. Michael moved to the hallway. Nobody there. But the office door, which he was certain he had closed, stood slightly open. On the floor, just outside it, lay a photograph that hadn't been there before, as though someone had dropped it leaving. He picked it up and went completely still. His mother, Beatrice Collins. His father, all three together, not posing, standing the way people stand when they share something they cannot say aloud. On the back, 6 words in faded ink. The accident was never an accident. Michael called Grace. She was at his door within the hour, and when they spread everything across the kitchen table, a shape began to emerge from the fog. Incomplete, but real. Their families had been connected long before either of them existed. Connected by something so significant that 2 women spent their lives hiding it. Then Grace noticed a building in the background of one photograph. Small, white, a blue sign just legible through a magnifying glass. St. Anne's Children's Home. Below it, a date. August 1998. 1 month before Michael's father disappeared. Neither of them needed to say it. Whatever their mothers died protecting, it started there. The orphanage sat at the end of a narrow road outside Asheville. Faded paint, boarded windows, weeds consuming the playground. Abandoned for years. But the gate was unlocked, and when they stepped through it, Michael spotted fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. Inside the administrative office, they searched for nearly an hour through filing cabinets of forgotten documents. Then Grace stopped and held out a page without a word. An admission record, dated August 1998. The child's name, Grace Collins. Her full name. Her date of birth. She had lived at St. Anne's for 4 months. She had no memory of it at all. Michael found the section marked emergency contact. Grace. He set the page on the desk carefully. Evelyn Parker was your emergency contact. The room felt smaller. Evelyn had not employed Grace out of vague affection. She had been listed as Grace's emergency contact when Grace was an infant, involved in her life from the very beginning, hidden completely for over 20 years. In another file, Beatrice Collins. Inside it, a letter. Dear Evelyn, if anything happens to me, promise you will watch over Grace. She must never learn what really happened that night. Not until she is old enough to understand. The truth would destroy her. And if certain people discover she knows, she will be in danger. Before either of them could speak, footsteps sounded above them. Slow, deliberate. A door closed somewhere on the second floor. They climbed the staircase together. Every door on the upper floor stood open except one. Michael pushed it. Inside, a desk, a filing cabinet, and a framed photograph. For people, Evelyn, Beatrice, Michael's father, and a fourth man neither of them recognized. All four standing close with the particular look of people who share a purpose. Beneath the frame, handwritten on a card, Founding Committee, 1998. A key rested on the desk beside the locked filing cabinet. As though placed there intentionally, Michael unlocked it. Inside, one thick red folder. Confidential written across the front. He opened it. A police report. September 14th, 1998. A witness statement claiming Daniel Parker was alive after the boating accident. Alive and unhurt. Grace turned the pages, each one more damning than the last, until the final page. A surveillance photograph, grainy and time-stamped, taken hours after the accident. Daniel Parker climbing calmly into the back of a black sedan. And seated in the front of that car was a man they both recognized immediately. Robert Sterling, Victoria's father, one of the most powerful men in North Carolina. A permanent fixture at the edges of Michael's entire life. Michael set the photograph down. Dozens of small memories rearranged themselves into a shape he didn't want to see. The tension between Robert and Evelyn at every event. The way Robert always seemed to know things before he should. None of it had been coincidence. Then Grace found a handwritten note tucked into the back of the folder. 5 words. Find the fourth founder first. Because he's still alive. Michael returned to his company the next morning and walked into a wall of silence. Employees looked away. His assistant met him near the elevator with a face that already said everything. The board held an emergency meeting. They voted on a temporary leadership change. She swallowed. Robert Sterling has been appointed interim CEO. Michael walked directly to the conference room. Robert was already there. Silver-haired. Perfectly composed. The practiced calm of a man who believes power protects him from consequences. You engineered this, Michael said. The board made a decision. Michael pulled the surveillance photograph from his jacket and held it up. Robert's eyes moved to it. And in that single second something cracked in his face. Just for a moment. But it was real. You were with my father the day everyone thought he died. He was alive. He was in your car. Robert's voice dropped. There are things your mother never wanted revealed. She's dead. She can't protect you anymore. Robert looked at Grace for the first time, and the color left his face, because she looked exactly like her mother, exactly like Beatrice Collins, standing here like a ghost from 1998 that had finally caught up with him. He whispered it without meaning to. Beatrice should have told you. The words landed like a confession. Robert knew Beatrice, not professionally, in the specific way people know each other when they have been through something irreversible together. Then he caught himself. His expression hardened. Security moved. Grace touched Michael's arm. Not here. Not yet. They left. But as they walked through the lobby, Grace looked back. Robert Sterling stood at the window watching them go. His hands, at his sides, were shaking. This man was not running a company. He was running from something that had finally found him. They were nearly out of time to find the fourth founder when Grace picked up the evening newspaper and went rigid. Local historian dies in apparent accident. The photograph showed an elderly man with a gray beard. The fourth face from the St. Anne's photograph. Professor Henry Walker. Dead that morning. His car had gone off a mountain road. An accident. That word again. The same word that had covered everything in this story. Evelyn had written find him first because she expected him to be reachable, which meant someone else had moved faster. Someone who knew what Henry Walker could tell them and made certain he never got the chance. At the bottom of the funeral notice, a handwritten addition that didn't belong there. 3 words. Bring Beatrice's key. They stared at each other. Then Grace was already moving. They found it that night after searching every box Beatrice Collins had ever left behind. One box was newer than the others. Locked. Inside a false bottom, a tiny brass key with a paper tag in Beatrice's handwriting. For Grace only. On the back, an address. A storage facility on the outskirts of Asheville. Unit 314. The lock opened the moment Grace inserted the key. Inside the unit, 3 things. A wooden trunk, a filing cabinet, and a television with a VHS player already connected and a tape resting on top. Michael and Grace. Written on the label in a handwriting neither recognized. Michael inserted the tape. Static. Then Evelyn Parker filled the screen. Younger. Composed. Sitting in a chair and speaking directly into the camera as though she had known exactly who would be watching. If you are watching this, then I failed. Grace felt her throat close. I hoped the truth would die with me. I was wrong. So I prepared this instead. She folded her hands. 27 years ago, a child was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. The doctors offered little hope. His parents were desperate. A pause. That child was Michael. Michael went completely still. Beatrice Collins saved your life. She was the only match the doctors could find. And because of the nature of the compatibility required, the donation came not from Beatrice herself, but from her unborn child. Grace felt the room tilt. Grace saved your life before she was born. Neither of them moved. Beatrice asked for nothing in return. Only one promise. If anything ever happened to her, I would watch over Grace and protect her from the truth until she was ready. I made that promise. I did not keep it well enough. Evelyn's voice broke slightly. Robert Sterling was one of 4 people who knew what had been done. When it was over, he decided the risk of exposure was more than he was willing to carry. He began working to ensure the secret stayed buried. By any means necessary. She looked into the camera. As long as Robert remains free. The screen cut to static. Michael stood. No. Gone. Cut. Mid-sentence. Just like the torn letter. Just like every missing page. Someone had been here first, erasing just enough to slow them down without destroying the rest. Grace reached into the trunk. A thick sealed envelope. Open only after the video. Inside, a notarized statement in Beatrice's handwriting. Michael read the first 6 words. Daniel Parker never abandoned his family. He sat down. Daniel had uncovered financial crimes. Robert Sterling had spent years diverting funds from charitable accounts connected to St. Anne's and other foundations he controlled. Daniel collected the evidence quietly, arranged to hand it to federal investigators on September 14, 1998. He never arrived. The boating accident was staged. But Daniel survived. Pulled from the water by a federal contact before Robert's men could confirm the death. Protective custody was arranged the same day. He had fought to come back. Every year the case wasn't ready. Every year, one more year. One more year became 27. Beatrice never stopped. She found Daniel's original evidence and built on it. She was 2 weeks from delivering it to a federal prosecutor when her car left a road on a clear night with no weather and no mechanical fault ever identified. Ruled an accident. Michael set the pages on the floor of the storage unit and sat with his back against the trunk. Grace sat beside him. Neither spoke. Some silences need to be sat inside of. Finally, she never told me he was alive. She was protecting you. Grace said. She protected me from my own father. Grace had no answer, because he was right, and it was devastating. And it was also true that Evelyn had done the only thing she could see to do, which did not make it hurt any less. At the back of the envelope, one more item. A flash drive. No note. He opened it on his laptop. Financial records. Emails. Surveillance logs. Years of documented crimes. And a video file recorded 3 months before Evelyn's death. She looked frail in it, much weaker, but her eyes were the same. If you have found this, you have found almost everything. One more truth. Daniel Parker is alive. He has been in federal protection for 27 years. The address at the end of this file will take you to him. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't wait any longer. Below the file, one address. A farmhouse in rural Tennessee. The drive took 4 hours. Michael barely spoke. He stared at the road, and Grace did not push him. She understood what this drive meant. She had spent her whole life without a father she never knew. Michael had spent his life believing his father chose to leave. These were different wounds. But she understood what it felt like to finally be close to an answer you had stopped letting yourself want. The farmhouse was small and white beneath 2 oak trees. A single light burned inside. Michael turned off the engine and sat without moving. What if 27 years turns a person into someone you don't recognize? He said quietly. Then you get to know him again, Grace said. He got out of the car. The porch steps groaned. Michael raised his hand to knock. The door opened before he could. An older man. Gray temples. A face weathered by something heavier than time. Broad shoulders carried slightly lower than they once were. The posture of a man who has been holding something up for too long. But the eyes. Michael saw his own eyes looking back at him. Daniel Parker stared at his son. His mouth opened. Every word he had rehearsed for 27 years had vanished completely. Michael, just the name, cracked down the middle as he said it. Michael crossed the porch and grabbed his father and held on. The way a boy holds on when he has been waiting longer than a boy should ever have to wait. Daniel's arms came around him. He pressed his face against his son's shoulder and shook, silently, the way people cry when they have forgotten how. Grace stood back. Tears ran freely down her face. She thought about Beatrice, about a woman who had given everything and was not here to see the things she had spent her life making possible. The grief and the gratitude lived in the same place inside her chest, and she let herself feel both. Inside, Daniel told them everything. The evidence, the plan, the boat, the federal contact, the 2 years that became 27, the letters he wrote that were never allowed to be sent. When he finished, Michael said only one word. Beatrice. Daniel looked at Grace. Tenderness and sorrow in equal measure. She was one of the most courageous people I ever knew. She saved my son before he was old enough to know what saving meant, and she never asked for anything back. He looked at Grace steadily. You have her eyes. Exactly her eyes. Grace looked down and said nothing. 6 weeks later, Robert Sterling was arrested on federal charges. Fraud, embezzlement, obstruction, conspiracy, and charges related to September 14, 1998 that the prosecution called attempted murder of a federal witness. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of documentation, built by 2 women who had both paid for it with their lives, had finally found the light. Robert stood in the courtroom in his $4,000 suit looking exactly like a man who has spent his life believing money opens every door. He looked that way until the judge finished reading the charges. Then something shifted in his face. The door he had been calculating was not there. The Parker Company recovered. Michael returned as CEO. The inheritance dispute collapsed. And Grace received something no amount of money could purchase. The full truth about her mother. Not the vague story of a woman who died young, but the real story. A woman who saved a child's life out of pure generosity and spent every remaining year of her life making sure the people trying to bury that sacrifice were never allowed to win. Beatrice Collins didn't live to see justice, but she built everything that made it possible. 7 months after Evelyn's death, Michael and Grace stood beneath the largest oak tree on the Parker estate. The rolling hills had turned amber and rust. The bare branches of the ancient oaks reached across the pale autumn sky. A small brass plaque rested at the base of the tree where Evelyn had watched the sun go down every evening for 30 years. Grace stood in front of it for a long time. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out the photograph. Beatrice and Evelyn, young, laughing, best friends in the summer of 1997, before either of them had any idea what was coming. She set it carefully at the base of the plaque. "She missed you," Grace said softly. "My whole life, she carried you without ever saying your name. I understand now why she couldn't." Her voice dropped. "I think she would have wanted you to know." Michael stood beside her. They were quiet together. The sun moved behind the mountains, and the light changed slowly. Gold to amber to the deep rose of last light. "She was right about you," Michael said. Grace met his eyes. "She was right about a lot of things." He reached out. She took his hand. No ceremony, no declaration, just two people standing in the last light. Finally, on the other side of a secret that had taken 27 years to find them. For the first time in her life, Grace felt it without question or condition. The weight of belonging, solid and real and not going anywhere. The wind moved through the oak trees. And somewhere in it, if you were willing to believe such things, it felt like two women finally at rest. A promise kept, a debt paid, a story brought home, or so they believed. 3 months later, on an ordinary Saturday evening, Michael and Grace sat on the steps of the Parker estate. They had become something for each other that neither had a perfect word for. Not what Evelyn imagined. Not a storybook ending constructed in a hospital. Quieter than that. Real. Built from shared experience and surviving something neither of them had asked for. Michael looked over at her. She knew, didn't she? Grace smiled faintly. Evelyn Parker always knew we would end up here. I think she knew we needed each other to find out the truth. The rest she hoped for. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she was right?" Grace looked at the sky, at the hills going gold in the late night, at the estate behind her that felt like a place that she served and now felt like a place where something had been returned to her. "Ask me again in a year," she said. Michael smiled. It was the most honest answer she had given. The last thing Evelyn Parker left behind wasn't money. It wasn't a property. It wasn't a condition attached to a will. It was a thread, pulled at the right moment, connected to everything in every way that mattered. And when it was finally followed all the way to the end, it led not to destruction, but to the people who had been waiting for it for a long time. If this story moved you, subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments. Do you think Grace should trust Michael after everything that happened? And what would you have done if you were in her position? We want to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching.